Nobody is coming to save your reputation. You have walked into rooms and disappeared. You have spoken and been overlooked. You have watched someone else say the exact words you just said, and the entire room turned toward them like sunflowers toward light. And you stood there, wondering what they had that you did not. That is not a mystery. That is a skill. And skills can be learned. After today, the version of you that shrinks, that waits to be acknowledged, that earns respect by accident or not at all. That version is finished. What you are about to learn is not about confidence tricks or power poses. It is about something older, quieter, and far more dangerous to everyone who has ever underestimated you. Pay attention. This begins now. Chapter 1. The invisible tax you pay every day. Something has been taken from you. Not loudly. Not in a single event you can point to and name. It has been taken in small, quiet increments over years, in rooms where you were present but not felt, in conversations where you spoke but were not heard, in moments where the opportunity passed to someone else and no one, including you, could fully explain why. That is where this book begins. Not with motivation. With accounting. There is a cost to moving through the world without presence. Most people never calculate it because it never arrives as a single bill. It arrives as a pattern. The meeting where your suggestion is acknowledged with a polite nod and then forgotten, until someone else says it louder and the room lights up. The relationship where you give more than you receive, not because you chose generosity, but because the other person simply assumed the arrangement, and you never corrected them. The opportunity that went to someone less qualified, less experienced, and less prepared than you. Someone who simply occupied their space with more certainty. The truth is, most people measure disrespect in obvious moments. The public dismissal. The sharp interruption. The overlooked promotion with no explanation. These moments sting, and they are real. But they are not where the real cost lives. The real cost is quieter than that. Every day you move through the world without commanding presence, you are taxed. Not in money. In the possibility. In the version of the conversation that never happened because someone decided, in the first 5 seconds, that you were not the authority in the room. In the relationship that was calibrated early and silently, to a version of you that was smaller than the truth. In the life that is slightly less than what it could have been, not because you lacked ability, but because you never learned to make the room feel your weight. This is what the invisible tax is. It is not dramatic. It is a slow erosion. And most people pay it for decades without ever filing a complaint because they never realize they are being charged. Now here is the lie that makes it worse. Society tells you that competence earns respect automatically. Work hard enough. Learn enough. Produce enough. And the recognition will come. This is one of the most expensive lies a productive person can believe, because it redirects all of your energy toward the wrong account. The truth is, brilliant people are ignored every single day. In every industry, in every household, in every conference room, in every city in the world, there are capable, intelligent, prepared people who are taken for granted. Not because they failed. Because presence is a separate skill from competence. And no one taught them that. Competence without presence is an engine with no wheels. It generates enormous energy and goes nowhere. The invisible tax does not care how hard you have worked. It applies equally to the talented and the mediocre, because it has nothing to do with what you know. It has everything to do with how you occupy space. Most people react to this by working harder, producing more, waiting longer. This is where most people stop. Right at the edge of the real work, because the real work is not another credential. It is not another achievement. It is a fundamental shift in how you understand your own presence and what it communicates before you ever open your mouth. There is a specific kind of pain that comes when you finally see this clearly. Not anger. Not sadness. Something colder. The recognition that people have formed a working model of you, and that model is smaller than the truth. That the version of you living in other people's assumptions is a diminished version. A version built not from your actual capacity, but from the signals you have been sending, quietly, consistently, without knowing it. This is where most people stop. The recognition is uncomfortable enough that it is easier to explain it away. To call it politics, or luck, or the particular unfairness of a given room. These explanations are available and not entirely wrong. But they are not useful. There are ways to stay comfortable in a situation that should make you uncomfortable. The truth is, awareness of the invisible tax is the only prerequisite for stopping it. You cannot correct a cost you refuse to see. So sit with this for a moment. Not in self-pity. In honesty. Think about what the quiet erosion has cost you. Not in the dramatic losses, but in the ordinary moments. The ones that added up. There is a scale. It has been slightly tipped for years. You never noticed because no single moment tipped it far enough to feel catastrophic. But the tilt was real. The accumulation was real. And now you can see it. Which means the next question is the only one that matters. What tipped it? And more precisely, what in you allowed it to stay tipped for this long without correction? That is where we go next. Chapter 2. Presence is not personality. Somewhere along the way, you were taught a lie so quietly that it never felt like a lesson. It felt like an observation. You watched certain people command rooms. You watched certain people speak and be heard, move and be noticed, sit in silence and still hold every eye in the space. And without anyone ever saying it directly, you concluded something. You decided that those people were simply built differently. That what they had was not a skill but a trait. Not something learned but something given. And that conclusion, that single quiet assumption, has been costing you ever since. Presence is not personality. Say that again, slowly. Presence is not personality. It is not charisma. It is not extroversion. It is not the particular gift of people who were born loud or born magnetic or born with the kind of face that rooms naturally turn toward. These things exist. They are real. But they are not present. They are performances running on top of presence, and without what is underneath them, they collapse under pressure. The loudest person in the room is not always the most commanding. The most charming person in the room is not always the most trusted. And the most magnetic person in the room is not always the one the room actually listens to when it matters. The truth is, presence is a decision. And most people have never made it. Think about the people you know who carry genuine authority. Not authority given to them by a title or a position, but the kind that exists before they introduce themselves. The kind that walks in before they do. If you observe them carefully, you will notice something that does not fit the story you were told. Some of them are quiet. Some of them are introverted. Some of them are not particularly funny or charming, or socially fluid. What they share is not a personality type. What they share is a quality of attention. They generate it. Consistently. Without effort that is visible. And that quality has a source, and the source is not genetics. Most people react to a powerful presence by admiring it from a distance. You choose to understand it from the inside. So what is actually happening when a person commands a room without performing for it? The answer begins with stillness. Not physical stillness alone, though that is part of it. A deeper stillness. The stillness of a person who is not waiting for permission to be where they are. Who is not monitoring the room for signs of approval or disapproval. Who is not running a constant background calculation of how they are being received. This internal stillness is the foundation of every external signal that reads as presence. It is the reason the quiet person at the end of the table can say 3 words and silence a conversation that 12 louder people could not redirect. The stillness is not absence. The stillness is the statement. This is where most people stop. They read something like this, and they think, that sounds like confidence. And I do not have confidence. So this does not apply to me. But confidence and stillness are not the same thing. Confidence is an emotion. It comes and goes. It is high before things go well and low after they go badly. It is the weather. Stillness is not weather. Stillness is the decision to stop letting the weather govern your behavior. It does not require you to feel certain. It requires you to act from a place that does not change based on how certain you feel in a given moment. The truth is, the most present people in any room are not the ones who feel the most confident. They are the ones who no longer need the room to confirm their right to be in it. This is a fundamental shift. It is not a technique. It is a reorientation. Because almost everything that destroys presence in ordinary people is driven by a single underlying behavior, seeking external confirmation before acting as though you belong. The glance around the room before speaking. The slight upward inflection at the end of a statement, as if attaching a question mark to your own certainty. The laugh that arrives a half-second too quickly in response to someone else's comment, signaling eagerness rather than amusement. The step back when challenged, instead of the stillness that says the challenge did not move you. None of these behaviors comes from bad character. They come from a deeply habituated pattern of waiting. Waiting for someone else to confirm that your presence is acceptable. And every time you wait, you teach the room something about you. The room learns that you are uncertain about your own place in it. And rooms are extraordinarily good at taking people at their own valuation. Most people react to discomfort by shrinking. You choose to hold the space. Here is what changes when you stop waiting. When you stop monitoring the room for permission, your attention shifts. Instead of spending cognitive energy on how you are being perceived, you begin spending it on what is actually being said, what is actually needed, and what actually matters in the room. This shift is visible. People in the room can feel the difference between someone who is performing and someone who is present. One is managing their image. The other is managing the situation. And the person managing the situation is always the person the room turns to. Presence is not about dominating the space. It is about owning your portion of it, completely, without apology, without negotiation, and without the constant low hum of self-monitoring that most people carry everywhere they go. The truth is, you have been performing in absence. Quietly, consistently, in 100 small ways, you have been signaling to rooms and relationships and opportunities that you are not entirely sure you belong there. That signal has been received. It has shaped how people treat you, what they offer you, and what they silently decide you are worth. That signal is not your personality. It is a habit. And habits can be broken. This is where most people stop, because breaking a habit requires first admitting it exists. It requires looking at the behaviors you have normalized, the self-reducing patterns you have mistaken for humility, politeness, or social grace, and naming them for what they are. Not character. Not identity. Not who you are. What have you been doing? You are not shy. You have been practicing smallness. You are not introverted. You may be introverted, that is a real thing, but introversion has nothing to do with presence. Some of the most commanding people who have ever lived were deeply introverted. What they were not was internally unsettled about their right to hold ground. You are not lacking charisma. You have been waiting for charisma to arrive before you allow yourself to take up space. And charisma does not arrive first. It emerges from the space you have already decided to occupy. So the work of this chapter, the work that everything else in this book depends on, is the decision. Not a technique. Not a posture adjustment. Not a vocal exercise. The decision. The internal, private, unchallengeable decision that you belong where you are standing, that you do not need the room to confirm it, and that the version of you that has been waiting for permission is now retired. Most people make this decision in theory and then immediately abandon it the moment the room pushes back. You choose to hold it. Especially when the room pushes back. Especially then. Presence is not what you perform. It is what you stop apologizing for. You have now seen the invisible tax clearly. You have understood that the cost was never about what you lacked. And you have begun to dismantle the oldest lie in your way. Now it is time to understand what the room actually sees before you ever speak a word. Chapter 3. The first 5 seconds. The room has already been decided. Not after you speak. Not after you introduce yourself. Not after you make your case or demonstrate your knowledge, or show what you are capable of. Before all of that. In the time it takes to draw a single breath, before a single word has left your mouth, the people in that room have already begun building a model of who you are, what you are worth, and how much attention you deserve. 5 seconds. In some cases, less. And everything that comes after is either confirmation or an uphill battle against a conclusion that was reached without your participation. This is not cynicism. This is neuroscience. And understanding it is not cause for despair. It is a precise map of where the real work happens. The human brain did not evolve for conference rooms, first dates, or job interviews. It evolved for survival. And survival required fast, automatic, subcortical decisions about every new presence that entered the environment. Threat or safe. Strong or weak. Dominant or submissive. These assessments were not meant to be deliberate. They were meant to be instant. And tens of thousands of years later, that same ancient machinery is still running in every person you have ever met. It is running in you. It ran when you met every significant person in your life. And it is running in every room you walk into, processing you, categorizing you, filing you away, before your conscious mind has even finished deciding what to say first. The truth is, the first 5 seconds are not the beginning of an impression. They are the entirety of it. Everything after is either defense or confirmation. Most people understand this intellectually and then walk into rooms as though it does not apply to them. They focus their preparation on what they will say. They rehearse their words, their arguments, their answers to anticipated questions. And they give almost no thought to the 5 seconds before any of that begins. The 5 seconds that will determine whether the room is ready to hear what they have to say, or has already decided to receive it politely and discount it quietly. This is where most people stop. At the level of content, it never reaches the level of signal. So what is the room actually reading in those first 5 seconds? It is reading speed. How quickly you move tells the room whether you are being chased or choosing your own pace. A person who enters quickly, with the particular urgency of someone who is slightly behind, signals that the environment is setting their rhythm. A person who enters at a pace they have chosen, not slowly to the point of theater, but deliberately, signals that they are not being driven by the pressure of the room. Speed is legible. It is one of the first things the room reads, and one of the things most people never consciously control. It is a reading trajectory. Where your eyes go in the first moment of entry tells the room everything about your relationship to that space. Eyes that move quickly, scanning for cues, searching for approval, checking whether it is safe to proceed, these are the eyes of a person asking for permission. Eyes that move with calm deliberateness, that take in the room without urgency, that find their target without apology, these are the eyes of a person who has already decided they belong there. The difference is small in physical terms. It is enormous in signal terms. It is a reading posture. Not in the superficial sense of whether your shoulders are back. In the deeper sense of whether your body looks like it belongs in the space it is entering. A body that contracts slightly on entry, that makes itself a little smaller, that hedges its physical footprint as though apologizing for the intrusion, sends a signal that registers before any conscious thought. Conversely, a body that enters at its full height, occupies its natural space without inflation or deflation, and does not adjust itself to the room temperature sends an entirely different signal. The room receives both signals accurately. The truth is, most people walk into rooms in a state of subtle apology. And the room accepts the apology without ever consciously registering it. Most people react to a new room by adjusting themselves to fit it. You choose to enter it as though it already fits you. Now here is the part that most people find uncomfortable, because it requires acknowledging something specific. The habits that undermine the first 5 seconds are not random. They are not bad luck. They are the physical expression of an internal question that has not been answered. The question is, do I belong here? And if that question has not been settled before entry, the body answers it honestly, in real time, in ways the room can read fluently. The darting eyes are the body's way of saying, I am not sure. The contracted posture is the body saying, I am making myself less threatening because I am not certain of my welcome. The accelerated pace is the body saying, I am trying to get through the exposure of entry as quickly as possible. Every one of these signals is an answer to that unsettled question. And the room hears every answer. This is where most people stop. They try to manage the signals without settling the question. They practice the posture without addressing what it expresses. And because the internal question is still open, the practiced posture feels forced, reads as performance, and eventually collapses under the pressure of a real interaction. The correction does not begin with the body. It begins with the decision that was described in the last chapter. The decision that you belong where you are standing. Your presence in this room requires no apology and no audition. When that decision is made clearly and settled internally, the body follows. Not perfectly, not immediately, but directionally. The signals begin to change because what they are expressing has changed. So before the next room you walk into, you are going to pause. Not long. 3 seconds at the threshold. And in those 3 seconds, you are going to answer the question. Not with a feeling. With a decision. I belong here. Not because the room has confirmed it. Because I have decided it. And then you are going to enter at the pace of someone who has already settled that question, with eyes that move without urgency, with a body that does not apologize for the space it occupies. The truth is, the room is not judging you. The room is reading you. And you are the author of what it reads. 3 seconds at the threshold. A decision made without the room's input. An entry that does not ask for permission. That is the entirety of the first 5 seconds done correctly. Everything in the room shifts from that single adjustment because everything in the room was waiting to know who just walked in. Now you have told it. You have learned what the room reads before you speak. Now it is time to give the room something worth reading when you do speak, starting with the most immediate and most underestimated instrument you carry. Chapter 4. The Body That Commands. Before you had language, you had a body. Before you had arguments, you had posture. Before you had words sophisticated enough to persuade, negotiate, or inspire, your body was already communicating, already sending signals, already shaping how every person in proximity understood your place in the world relative to theirs. Language is recent, in evolutionary terms. The body's communication system is ancient. And ancient systems do not yield easily to newer ones. This matters because of a simple, uncomfortable truth. In any interaction, especially any interaction where status, trust, or authority is being assessed, the body speaks first, speaks loudest, and is believed most. Words can lie. Tone can be managed. The body, operating beneath conscious awareness, tells the truth about the person's internal state. And everyone in the room is reading it, not deliberately, not analytically, but automatically, the way they process temperature or sound, as background information that shapes their entire experience of the foreground. The truth is, your posture has been making arguments about you before you ever opened your mouth. The question is whether those arguments have been working for you or against you. Most people think about posture in cosmetic terms. Shoulders back because it looks better. Head up because it projects confidence. These are not wrong, but they are shallow. They produce the performance of posture without its substance, and the room can feel the difference. Performed posture has a quality of effort to it, a slight rigidity, a self-consciousness that reads as insecurity wearing a costume. Real postural authority does not look like someone trying to stand correctly. It looks like someone who has never been in the habit of making themselves small, because they never decided they needed to. The body that commands is not a body at its most impressive. It is a body at its most settled. Consider what the body does under social pressure. The shoulders rotate slightly inward, protecting the chest. The chin drops a degree or two, reducing exposure. The feet move closer together, narrowing the base. The hands find something to hold or each other to grip. These are ancient protective responses, and they are triggered not by physical threat but by social threat, by the perception that the environment is evaluating you and the outcome is uncertain. Every person in every room has experienced this. And every person in every room can read it in others, because it is the same system running in all of them. The body that commands has trained itself out of these responses. Not through suppression. Through the settling of the internal question that triggers them in the first place. Most people react to social pressure by contracting. You choose to hold your ground, in every sense of the phrase. Now, let us talk about the specific signals. Not as a checklist to perform, but as a language to understand. The hands are one of the most legible parts of the body in any interaction. They are also the part that most people are least aware of. What you do with your hands when you are not speaking is a continuous broadcast. Hands that grip, fidget, hide in pockets, press together with white-knuckle tension. These are hands that are confessing anxiety to everyone in the room. Hands that rest. Open, relaxed, neither performing stillness nor betraying tension. These are hands that communicate control. Not control over other people. Control of self. And control of self is the foundation of every other form of authority. The eyes carry a different kind of weight. Eye contact is the most concentrated form of nonverbal signal available to a human being, and most people manage it poorly in one of two directions. They avoid it, breaking contact too quickly, looking down or away when challenged, and every break communicates the same thing: I am not fully comfortable with what is happening here. Or they force it, holding contact past the point of communication and into the territory of aggression or dominance performance, which reads as a different kind of insecurity. Real eye contact is comfortable. It holds without gripping. It releases without retreating. It communicates that you are fully present, unafraid of what you might see in the other person's response, and not managing your gaze because you are not managing your image. The truth is, people decide whether to trust you largely based on what your eyes do when you are listening, not when you are speaking. When you speak, they are processing your words. When you listen, they are reading your face. And your eyes, specifically, are telling them whether you are actually present or whether you are somewhere behind your own expression, calculating, monitoring, waiting for the interaction to end. Most people react to being observed by performing. You choose to simply be present enough that performance becomes unnecessary. Then there is movement. Or more precisely, pace. How quickly a person moves through a space broadcasts the pressure they are under. It is one of the most immediate and most accurate readings the room performs. Rushed movement says, I am behind. I am reactive. The environment is setting my rhythm, and I am trying to catch up to it. It signals scarcity, urgency, a kind of low-level desperation that has nothing to do with the content of what you are doing and everything to do with the frequency at which you are broadcasting it. Deliberate movement says the opposite. Not slow for the sake of slow. Not a performance of ease. Simply the pace of a person who is choosing their speed rather than being driven by the room's tempo. The person who crosses a space deliberately, who sits down without the rushed choreography of someone trying to minimize the time they spend being observed, who turns toward a speaker without the over-corrected snap of someone who is not paying attention, this person communicates something the room registers immediately and deeply. They communicate that they are not in a hurry because they are not afraid of the moment. Pace is one of the most immediately adjustable signals you carry. You can change it in the next room you enter. Not dramatically. 1 degree toward deliberate. 1 degree away from urgency. And notice what changes in how the room responds to your movement, because it will change, and the change will not be subtle. This is where most people stop. They understand the principle, and they wait for a moment important enough to apply it. They save these adjustments for the high-stakes presentation, the critical interview, the significant confrontation. And in all the ordinary moments between those events, they continue broadcasting the old signals, reinforcing the old habits, training their nervous system back toward the patterns they are trying to leave behind. The truth is, the ordinary moments are where the work happens. The body that commands in a high-stakes room is the body that has practiced commanding in every low-stakes room before it. Presence is not a mode you switch on for important events. It is a standard you maintain until it becomes the only way you know how to be. So the practice is not reserved for the next important moment. It begins in the next ordinary one. The elevator, the hallway, the coffee shop, the casual conversation that no one would call significant. These are the training grounds. These are where the new signals are rehearsed until they stop being signals and start being true. The body that commands is not built in a single moment of decision. It is built in 10,000 ordinary moments where you choose to hold your ground, keep your hands still, meet the room's eyes without apology, and move at the pace of a person who belongs exactly where they are. You have now given the room something to read before you speak and in how you move. Now it is time to give it something to hear. Because the voice carries authority that the body can only prepare the room for. Chapter 5. The Voice That Ends Arguments. There are two conversations happening every time a person speaks. The first conversation is the one made of words. The argument, the explanation, the story, the point. This is the conversation most people prepare for. They think about what to say, how to structure it, which words carry the most weight, and how to make the logic airtight. This preparation is not wasted, but it is incomplete. Because the second conversation is happening simultaneously, running underneath the words, carried not by what is being said but by how it is being said. The frequency, the pace, the weight, the silences. And when these two conversations conflict, when the words say one thing, and the voice underneath them says another, the room does not split the difference. The room believes the voice. This is not a preference. It is physiology. The part of the brain that processes tone, resonance, and vocal rhythm is older and faster than the part that processes language. It receives the signal first. It forms its assessment first. And that assessment shapes the frame through which every subsequent word is interpreted. A sentence delivered in a grounded, settled tone is heard as a fact. The same sentence, delivered with an upward inflection and a compressed pace, is heard as a plea. The words are identical. The communication is completely different. The truth is, most people are making brilliant arguments in voices that undermine every word. So begin here. With the most common and most correctable vocal pattern that destroys authority in otherwise capable people. Upward inflection at the end of declarative statements. The habit of ending sentences as though they are questions. Of attaching, at the close of every assertion, a small acoustic signal that says, "I have said this thing, but I am not entirely certain you agree, and I would like to know if you do before I commit to it fully." This pattern is extraordinarily common. It has become so normalized in certain conversational cultures that people who use it are entirely unaware of it. And it is one of the single most damaging vocal habits a person can carry, because it transforms every statement into a request. Not for information. For permission. The correction is specific. Statements end on a falling or level tone. Not harshly. Not with an aggressive finality that signals defensiveness. Simply with the acoustic shape of a person who has said what they meant and is comfortable with the weight of it. Downward inflection is the sound of certainty. It is the vocal equivalent of setting something down and leaving it there, rather than holding it out with both hands and waiting to see if anyone will take it. Most people react to uncertainty by speaking more. You choose to speak with more weight and say less. Now consider pace. Compressed speech is the vocal signature of pressure. When a person is anxious, nervous, or uncertain, their speech accelerates. The words come faster, the pauses disappear, the breathing becomes shallow, and the sentences run together in a continuous stream that signals urgency at a frequency the room reads before it processes a single word. This acceleration is a defense mechanism. It is the voice trying to get through the exposure of speaking as quickly as possible, to minimize the time spent being evaluated. And it accomplishes the opposite of its intention. Instead of reducing the room's scrutiny, it intensifies it. Because a voice under pressure invites the room to ask why. Slowing down is not a technique for sounding authoritative. It is the acoustic result of not being pressured by the moment you are in. And when it is genuine, It is one of the most powerful vocal signals available. The person who speaks at a pace they have chosen, who does not accelerate under the room's attention, who takes the time between thoughts because they are not afraid of the space those thoughts occupy, this person sounds like someone who has said difficult things in difficult rooms before and come through unchanged. The truth is, the room does not give authority to the fastest voice. It gives authority to the most settled one. Then there is silence. And this requires its own treatment, because silence is the most misunderstood tool in the entire vocal register. Most people experience silence in conversation as failure, as a gap to be filled, a malfunction to be corrected, an awkwardness to be rescued before the other person notices. This relationship with silence is that of a person afraid of the room's evaluation, who interprets every pause as a signal that they have lost the room's confidence and must act immediately to regain it. And so they fill the silence with qualifications, repetitions, tangential points, and half-finished thoughts, the vocal equivalent of nervous movement. Silence, used deliberately, communicates the opposite of failure. It communicates selection. The person who pauses before answering is not a person who does not know the answer. They are a person who has decided that the answer is worth choosing carefully. The pause says, "What comes next was not the first thing that occurred to me. It was the right thing." And the room, without processing this consciously, assigns weight to what follows a pause that it does not assign to what follows immediately. This is where most people stop. They understand the value of silence in theory and then collapse into speech the moment the room goes quiet, because the discomfort of silence is immediate and the benefit of holding it is delayed. Training the capacity to hold silence is not comfortable. The discomfort is the old habit resisting its own correction. The discomfort is evidence that the work is real. Now consider volume, and specifically the habit of lowering the voice at the end of sentences. Many people begin a sentence with adequate volume and then trail off as they approach the end, so that the most important word, the word that carries the conclusion, the point, the decision, arrives in the room at half the weight of the words that preceded it. This pattern is particularly damaging because it reverses the architecture of emphasis. The end of a sentence is where authority lives. The final word is the word the room carries forward. When it arrives quietly, tentatively, as though the speaker lost confidence in the sentence between its beginning and its end, the entire sentence is undermined. The correction is to maintain or slightly increase weight toward the end of key sentences. Not volume for its own sake. Weight. The sense that the final word was chosen, meant, and delivered with the same conviction as the first. Most people react to the room's silence by filling it. You choose to let it work. Here is the full picture assembled. A voice that carries authority lands at a pace that has not been pressured into acceleration. It ends statements on a falling or level tone that does not ask for the room's permission. It pauses before answering, because the answer was selected rather than escaped. It maintains its weight through the end of each sentence, so the conclusion arrives as firmly as the premise. And it is comfortable in silence, because silence is not failure. Silence is the room making room for what you are about to say. This voice is not a performance. It is not a character. It is the acoustic expression of a person who has settled the internal question that runs beneath every vocal habit. The question of whether what they are saying deserves to be heard. The truth is, every voice in that room is already answering that question. The only variable is whether the answer is working for you or against you. You have now given the room a body that communicates before you speak and a voice that carries weight when you do. But both of these can be undone in seconds by the specific words you choose and the ones you allow yourself to keep using out of habit. Chapter 6. Words that build walls or thrones. The body has spoken. The voice has carried weight. The room has received both signals and formed its initial assessment. And now you open your mouth, and the words arrive. And in the first sentence, sometimes in the first 3 words, everything the body and voice built can be confirmed or dismantled. Because language is not neutral. Every word you choose is a vote. A vote for the version of you that commands the room, or a vote for the version of you that is still asking the room for permission to be taken seriously. Most people do not think about language this way. They think about language as a vehicle for content, a way of moving information from one mind to another. And it is that. But it is also something else simultaneously. It is a continuous broadcast of your relationship to your own authority. Every qualifier you attach to a statement, every preemptive apology you place before a point, every hedge you insert between your conclusion and the room's reception of it, these are not just words. They are instructions. Instructions to the room about how seriously to take what follows. The truth is, most people have been undermining their own intelligence with their own language for so long that they can no longer hear it happening. So name it directly. The vocabulary of diminishment. This is the collection of phrases, habits, and linguistic patterns that signal to every listener that you do not fully trust what you are about to say. It sounds like this. I just wanted to quickly mention. This might be a stupid question, but I could be wrong, and correct me if I am. Sorry to interrupt. Does that make sense? I am not sure if this is relevant. Maybe this is just me. Each of these phrases, in isolation, sounds like politeness, like social grace, like the kind of considerate humility that good people practice. And that is precisely why they are so dangerous. They have been mistaken for virtues so consistently that the people using them have no idea they are paying a price for each one. They are not humble. Humility is the accurate assessment of your own limitations. These phrases are preemptive apologies for the space you are about to occupy. They tell the room, before the point has even been made, that you are not certain the point deserves to be made. And the room, receiving that signal, adjusts accordingly. It prepares to receive something of limited weight. And then, regardless of how strong the actual point is, it is received within the frame you built for it. This is where most people stop. They hear this and think, but I do not want to seem arrogant. I do not want to bulldoze the room. I do not want to be the person who speaks with so much certainty that no one feels invited into the conversation. This line of thinking conflates two entirely separate things. Certainty and aggression are not the same thing. Precision and arrogance are not the same thing. A person who says what they mean without apologizing is not someone who has decided they are always right. They are a person who has decided that their contribution to the room deserves the same consideration as anyone else's, and they are presenting it accordingly. That is not arrogance. That is basic self-respect expressed in language. Most people react to the fear of seeming arrogant by making themselves small. You choose to be precise without being aggressive, which is an entirely different and far more powerful position. Now consider what precision actually sounds like. Precision is not hardness. It is not the clipped, aggressive speech of a person who has decided that softness is weakness. Precision is the quality of language that has been chosen rather than escaped. It uses specific words instead of approximate ones. It makes direct statements instead of floating suggestions. It presents conclusions as conclusions rather than as possibilities that require the room's endorsement before they can exist. Compare these two sentences. First, I kind of feel like maybe we should possibly consider looking at a different approach to this. Second, this approach is not working. Here is what I recommend instead. The information in both sentences is identical. The authority they carry is not. The first sentence has been so thoroughly qualified that by the time the actual point arrives, it has been stripped of all weight. The second sentence knows what it means and says it. The truth is, vague language is not modest. It is evasive. And rooms read evasion as uncertainty, and uncertainty as the absence of authority. Then there is over-explanation. The habit of continuing to speak after the point has been made, adding justifications, elaborations, and supporting arguments that were not requested and are not needed, because the silence after a complete statement feels too exposed. Over-explanation is driven by anxiety. The underlying belief is that if the argument is not exhaustive, the room will find a gap and use it to dismiss the conclusion. So the speaker keeps building, keeps reinforcing, keeps adding material to a case that was already complete. And the effect is the opposite of reassuring. Each additional justification signals that the speaker is not confident that the previous justification was sufficient. Each elaboration suggests that the position requires more defense than a strong position should need. The room receives all of this and calibrates accordingly. Make the point. Stop. Let the silence that follows be the final word. Because a point that stands in silence carries weight. A point that immediately begins to explain itself is one that is asking not to be challenged. Most people react to silence after speaking by filling it. You choose to let it confirm what you just said. Here is the complete picture of language that commands. It does not begin with an apology. It does not end with a question. It does not carry qualifiers that were added out of social anxiety rather than intellectual honesty. It uses specific words because approximate ones are a form of hiding. It makes direct statements because indirect ones are a form of asking. It stops when the point is complete because continuing past completion is a form of doubt made audible. This is not a personality type. It is a standard. A standard for how you treat your own conclusions before you offer them to a room. And the standard begins not in the words themselves, but in the decision that precedes them. The decision that what you are about to say is worth saying exactly as you mean it, without modification for the comfort of people who might prefer you to be less certain. The truth is, the room is not waiting for you to be impressive. It is waiting for you to be clear. Clarity is the rarest and most commanding form of communication available. And it begins the moment you stop apologizing for having a point of view. You have now given the room a body, a voice, and a language that all carry the same signal. Now the deepest work begins. Because all of it can be undone in a single moment of reactivity. What holds the body, the voice, and the language together under pressure is something that cannot be performed. It can only be built. Chapter 7: The Architecture of Unshakable Calm. Every tool in this book lives or dies in a single moment. Not the moment you walk into a room. Not the moment you open your mouth. The moment someone pushes back. The moment the room challenges you, dismisses you, provokes you, or simply refuses to receive what you offered. That moment is the real test. Not of your technique. Of your foundation. Because technique without foundation is a structure without ground beneath it. It performs well in calm conditions and collapses under the first real pressure. And pressure, in any life that involves other people, is not rare. It is a permanent condition. This chapter is about the permanent condition. Composure under pressure is the most legible form of strength available to a human being. More legible than physical size, more legible than social status, more legible than any credential or achievement. When a person is challenged and does not fracture, when they are provoked and do not escalate, when the room turns against them, and they simply hold their position with quiet, unhurried certainty, every person watching that moment receives the same signal. This person has a foundation that cannot be reached by what is happening on the surface. This person is not governed by what I think of them. This person cannot be moved by the tools that move most people. That signal is authority at its most undiluted. And it is available to anyone who is willing to build it. The truth is, most people have confused composure with suppression. They believe that remaining calm under pressure means pushing the reaction down, containing it, forcing the outside to contradict the inside. This is not composure. It is performance. And performance has a cost. It exhausts the performer. It is visible to careful observers as a kind of controlled strain. And it eventually fails because the pressure of maintaining a performance that contradicts an unresolved internal state is not sustainable indefinitely. Real composure is not the suppression of reaction. It is the development of a different relationship to the stimulus that causes it. This is where Stoic philosophy enters, not as an academic concept but as a practical technology for exactly this problem. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca. These were not people who theorized about composure from a position of comfort. Marcus Aurelius governed the largest empire in the known world for nearly 2 decades, continuously surrounded by war, betrayal, political instability, and personal loss. Epictetus was born a slave. Seneca navigated the court of Nero, one of history's most dangerous and unpredictable rulers. These men developed their philosophy under real pressure. And the central insight of that philosophy, the one that everything else rests on, is this: between stimulus and response, there is a gap. And in that gap lives everything. Most people have never found this gap because they have never trained themselves to look for it. The stimulus arrives, and the response follows so quickly, so automatically, so habitually, that the gap is invisible. The interruption in a meeting lands, and the defensiveness rises. The dismissal arrives, and the hurt or anger surfaces. The challenge arises, and the counterattack or retreat occurs before any conscious decision has been made. The stimulus controlled the response entirely because the gap was never entered. Training the gap is the central discipline of this chapter. Not as a concept. As a practice. When a stimulus arrives, specifically the kind of social or emotional stimulus that historically has driven you toward a reaction you later regretted, the practice is to find the gap. To insert, between the arrival of the stimulus and the production of a response, a moment of conscious choice. Not a long moment. Not a theatrical pause that broadcasts to the room that you are performing composure. A genuine, internal pause. A fraction of a second in which you observe the reaction that wants to emerge and ask a single question. Is this the response I would choose, or is this the response the stimulus is driving me toward? Most people react because they have never asked that question in time. You choose because you have practiced asking it until asking becomes faster than reacting. The distinction matters because it is the difference between being governed and governing. A person who reacts is being governed by whoever or whatever produced the stimulus. Their emotional state, their next words, their next action, all of it is being authored by the external event. A person who chooses their response has retained authorship. And authorship, in any interaction, is authority. This is where most people stop. They understand the gap intellectually and then encounter a real provocation and discover that intellectual understanding offers almost no protection. The gap requires training. And training requires repetition under actual discomfort, not imagined discomfort. The low-stakes moments are the laboratory. The colleague who interrupts you in a meeting. The person who responds to your point with dismissal rather than engagement. The family member who reduces you to a familiar, well-worn pattern. These are not just irritants. They are training opportunities. Every time you find the gap in a low-stakes moment, you build the capacity to find it in a high-stakes one. The truth is, the gap is a muscle. And like every muscle, it grows only under resistance. Now consider what composure communicates to a room that is watching it operate under pressure. When a person is challenged and responds calmly, the room receives several simultaneous signals. First, the challenge did not reach the foundation. Whatever was said or done in an attempt to destabilize this person did not land at the level it was aimed at. Second, this person has been in this position before. That the steadiness is not a first-time performance, but an established pattern. A response that comes from somewhere practiced and deep. Third, and most powerfully, that this person has made a decision about what governs their behavior, and that decision is not contingent on how they are being treated. This last signal is the rarest and the most commanding. Because the vast majority of human behavior is contingent. People are kind when they are treated kindly. They become defensive when challenged. They are generous when they feel secure and contracted when they feel threatened. Contingent behavior is the norm. And a person who operates by a standard that does not change based on what they receive is immediately and instinctively recognized as operating at a different level than the people around them. The truth is, the room does not trust people who are only calm when everything is going well. The room trusts people who are equally calm when things are not. Most people react to provocation by either fighting or retreating. You choose a third option. You hold. Holding is not passivity. This is a critical distinction. The person who holds under pressure is not the person who says nothing, accepts everything, and absorbs mistreatment without response. Holding is the capacity to remain internally settled while choosing a deliberate, proportionate, and self-authored response. It is the difference between a wall and a foundation. A wall resists everything equally and gives nothing back. A foundation simply does not move. And from a foundation that does not move, you can respond to anything. With precision, with appropriate force, with the particular authority of a person who has chosen their next word rather than been driven to it. Here is what the practice produces over time. Not the absence of emotion. Emotion is information. The absence of emotion is not a strength. It is numbness, and numbness is its own form of damage. What the practice produces is the absence of automatic reaction. The emotions continue to arrive. They carry real information about what is happening in the interaction. The difference is that they are no longer in charge of the response. They inform them. They do not determine it. This is the architecture of unshakable calm. Not a wall. Not numbness. Not the performance of serenity over a foundation of suppressed reaction, but the genuinely settled interior of a person who has trained the gap until the gap became their natural residence. Until the space between stimulus and response became wide enough to make a deliberate choice every time, in every room, under any pressure. Marcus Aurelius did not write his private journals because he had achieved mastery. He wrote them because mastery requires daily maintenance. Because the gap must be re-entered every day, in every new form of pressure, for as long as you are alive and in contact with other people. The discipline is not a destination. It is a practice. And the practice begins not in the next difficult conversation. It begins in the next ordinary one, where the stakes are low enough that you can afford to train rather than simply survive. You have built the internal architecture. Now the question is, what do you do with it when the people around you begin to test its walls? And they will test them. People always test what appears solid. What you do in that moment, specifically how you define what you will and will not tolerate, is where the next chapter lives. Chapter 8: Boundaries as a Language. There is a word that has been so thoroughly mishandled in the culture that it has almost lost its usefulness. The word is boundaries. It has been softened, weaponized, therapized, and turned into a concept so loaded with social anxiety that most people either dismiss it as weakness or deploy it as aggression, and almost no one uses it for what it actually is. A boundary is not a wall. It is not a punishment. It is not an ultimatum delivered at the end of a long accumulation of resentment. It is not the dramatic declaration that signals a relationship is ending, or a conversation is over. These are the distorted versions, precisely because they are the ones that emerge when the actual discipline of boundary setting has been absent for so long that the dam finally breaks and everything behind it comes out at once. A boundary, properly understood, is a communication. A clear, early, calm statement about what you will and will not engage with. It is a policy, not a punishment. And like all effective policies, its power comes not from how forcefully it is stated, but from how consistently it is maintained. The truth is, most people do not have boundaries. They have tolerances. And tolerances are very different things. A tolerance is a limit you have not yet communicated, that you carry silently, that you allow to be exceeded repeatedly while the internal pressure builds, until the accumulation reaches a point where the response is no longer proportionate to the immediate provocation, but to every preceding violation that was never addressed. This is not boundary setting. This is a delayed explosion. And delayed explosions are not authoritative. They provide evidence to everyone watching that you were not in control of the situation for a long time before the explosion, and that your current reaction is driven by pent-up pressure rather than a deliberate policy. The person who explodes after long tolerance is not seen as someone who finally stood their ground. They are seen as someone who was overwhelmed. And the person who overwhelmed them has learned something useful. That you can be pushed for a long time before anything happens. Most people react to being crossed by absorbing it or erupting. You choose to address it the first time, in the language of policy rather than pain. So what does a boundary, properly delivered, actually sound like? It is shorter than people expect. It carries no emotional charge, not because the emotion is being suppressed, but because the boundary is not a reaction to this specific violation. It is a standing position being stated for the first time or restated for clarity. It does not explain itself at length. It does not justify itself with history. It does not invite negotiation about whether the boundary is reasonable. It sounds like this. I will not continue this conversation at this volume. Not, I feel really hurt when you raise your voice at me, and I need you to understand that it makes me feel disrespected, and I have told you this before, and you keep doing it. The second statement may be entirely true. It may carry real and legitimate pain. But it is not a boundary. It is a report of suffering, delivered in a way that makes the other person the authority over whether the suffering continues. The first statement quietly, completely, and without drama removes that authority. It sounds like this. That does not work for me. Not a paragraph of explanation about why it does not work, what has led to this moment, and a list of conditions under which it might eventually work. Simply, that does not work for me. Full stop. Let the silence after it be as long as it needs to be. It sounds like this. I am not going to discuss that here. Not an apology for refusing. Not a promise to discuss it later as compensation for the refusal now. The statement is complete. It owes no one an explanation for the existence of the limit. This is where most people stop. The clean, unexplained boundary feels rude to them. It feels abrupt. It feels like the absence of the social lubrication they have been trained to apply to every interaction to keep things comfortable. And they are right that it feels that way. What they are wrong about is the interpretation of that feeling. The discomfort of the clean limit is not evidence that the limit was wrong. It is evidence that the relationship or interaction has been calibrated to a version of you that does not have limits. And recalibration is always uncomfortable until it settles. The truth is, the people in your life have been trained by you. Not deliberately. Not consciously. But every interaction you have had with them has been a lesson in what is acceptable, and they have learned it thoroughly. Every time a limit was tested, and you absorbed the violation, they learned that the limit is not real. Every time you erupted after long tolerance, they learned that the limit exists but is optional, as it can be ignored for an extended period without consequence. The training has been happening whether you intended it or not. Consistent limits produce consistent respect. This is not a theory. It is a behavioral pattern observable in every relationship, in every culture, and at every period of human history. The people who are treated with the most consistent consideration are not the people who demanded it most loudly. They are the people who communicated their standards most clearly and maintained them most consistently, without anger, without explanation, without negotiation about whether the standards were reasonable. Most people react to violations by hoping the other person will eventually understand. You choose to make the standard legible the first time. Now, address the fear that most people carry into this practice. The fear that setting clear limits will cost them relationships, popularity, or approval. This fear is worth examining honestly, because it is not entirely without basis. Some relationships will not survive clear limits. Some people who currently occupy space in your life are there specifically because you have not been clear about what their presence costs you. When you become clear, some of them will leave. This is not a loss. It is a filter operating correctly. The relationships that cannot survive your clarity were never based on genuine regard for you. They were based on access to a version of you that had not yet decided what it was worth. The relationships that survive your clarity will be different. They will be calibrated to the actual person rather than the accommodating one. They will involve people who have learned, through experience, that you mean what you say and say what you mean. And the respect in those relationships will be of a fundamentally different quality than the relationship maintenance that came before. It will be earned. On both sides. And earned respect is the only kind that holds. The truth is, clear limits do not damage relationships worth keeping. They define them. They give them a shape that both people can navigate with confidence because they know where the ground is. Here is the final and most important point about limits as a language. They are not about the other person. Every attempt to frame limit setting as something done to another person misunderstands its purpose entirely. The limit is not a weapon. It is not a message about the other person's worth, behavior, or character. It is a statement about your own standard. It says, "This is where I stand." Not, "You are wrong to have crossed that line." Simply, "I do not stand beyond it." When limits are held from this position, from the position of a person stating their own standard rather than judging someone else's, they carry a quality that violations cannot destabilize. Because they are not contingent on the other person's understanding or agreement. They simply exist. Quietly. Consistently. Like the edge of a table. The table does not become angry when something falls off it. It simply has an edge. And everyone who interacts with it learns, quickly and without drama, where that edge is. You have built the foundation. You have controlled the body, the voice, the language, and the composure. You have learned to communicate your limits without anger and hold them without erosion. But there is a specific challenge that none of these tools fully addresses. The challenge of rooms where your reputation was built before you understood any of this. Rooms that have a working model of you that is outdated. Rooms that knew the version of you that paid the invisible tax willingly. What you do in those rooms requires a different kind of discipline entirely. Chapter 9. When respect must be reclaimed. Everything in the previous chapters has been building toward a new way you show up. A version with more settled authority, more precise language, clearer limits, a more grounded body, a voice that carries weight. And if you were starting fresh, if every person you encountered from this point forward was meeting you for the first time, the work would be relatively straightforward. New signals, clean slate, fresh assessment. The room would read you accurately from the beginning. But you are not starting fresh. Not with everyone. There are rooms you have already been in for years. There are relationships that have been running their established programs for decades. There are colleagues who have watched you defer. Family members who have managed you since childhood. Social groups whose understanding of who you are was built from the earliest version of you, the one that had not yet named the invisible tax, had not yet understood what the body broadcasts, had not yet learned the language of clean limits and settled composure. These people have a model of you. And that model is not waiting to be updated. It is waiting to be confirmed. This is the hardest respect to earn. Not because the people holding the old model are malicious. In most cases, they are not. But because the human mind is conservative. It prefers confirming existing beliefs to revising them. It has invested time and energy into building a picture of you, and it will defend that picture with a persistence that has nothing to do with accuracy and everything to do with the cognitive comfort of consistency. The truth is, changing how established relationships perceive you is not a conversation. It is a campaign. And campaigns require a specific, disciplined kind of patience. Begin with the most common mistake. The announcement. When people decide to change how they show up in the world, their first instinct is often to declare the change. To tell the people around them that something is different now, that they have learned something, that the old patterns are being replaced. This instinct is understandable. The change feels significant from the inside, and significance tends to want to be named. But the announcement is almost always a mistake. Not because the change is not real. Because the announcement converts the change into a performance, and everyone who hears it is now watching for evidence that the performance is not sustained. Announcing a change gives the audience a before and after frame. And that frame makes every relapse visible, every moment of inconsistency dramatic, every slip back into old patterns a confirmation of the cynical view that nothing has actually changed. The announcement also invites skepticism before the evidence has accumulated. It asks people to update their model based on their self-report, which is the weakest possible form of evidence. And people who have known you for years will not update a years-long model based on a self-report. They will wait for behavior. And they will wait with some skepticism. So do not announce. Change the behavior. Do not explain the change. Let the evidence accumulate. Most people react to being unseen by explaining themselves. You choose to make the explanation unnecessary. Now address the timeline, because this is where most people abandon the process. When a person changes their behavior in an established relationship, the other person's first response is almost never a revised model. It is a test of the new behavior. Often unconscious, often not experienced as a test by the person conducting it, but a test nonetheless. The established relationship has certain patterns, certain grooves worn by years of repeated interaction, and those grooves carry momentum. The person who used to defer gets pushed to defer again. The person who used to absorb violations encounters a new violation. The person who used to over-explain is asked a question that would previously have prompted a paragraph of justification. How you respond to these tests in the first weeks and months of the change is everything. Because if the new behavior holds up under testing, the other person's nervous system slowly begins to revise its expectations. Not consciously, not dramatically, but in the small incremental way that all deep expectations change. Through repeated experience of a new reality, which eventually makes the old model feel inaccurate. This is where most people stop. The initial testing feels like rejection. It feels like the change is not being received, not being recognized, not being rewarded with the revised treatment that was the whole point of the effort. And so people revert. They conclude that the other person is incapable of seeing them differently, or that the relationship is too set in its ways to change, or that the effort required is not worth the return. And in reverting, they confirm the original model so thoroughly that the next attempt will face even more resistance. The truth is, the discomfort of the testing phase is not a sign that the change is failing. It is the price of changing a pattern that someone else's nervous system has come to rely on. That price is real. And it must be paid in full before the new pattern is established. Do not explain the change. Do not demand recognition for the change. Do not become frustrated that the change has not yet produced the response you expected. Simply continue. The recalibration happens on the other person's schedule, not yours. Your only variable is the consistency of the new behavior. Most people react to slow results by either forcing the issue or abandoning the work. You choose to continue as if the result were already settled. Now address the specific case of long-standing authority figures. Parents, older siblings, long-term managers, and people who have held a particular kind of power over your self-conception for an extended period. These are the hardest cases, because the model they hold of you was built not just through observed behavior, but through the particular intimacy of having known you in your least formed states. They carry a version of you that predates your current understanding of yourself. And they may have a significant emotional investment in that version remaining accurate. With these relationships, the work is slower, and the resistance is often more personal. Changing how you show up in these relationships can feel, to the other person, like a kind of betrayal. Like a rejection of the relationship itself, rather than a revision of your own standard within it. This feeling in them will sometimes be expressed as criticism, sometimes as dismissal, sometimes as an escalated attempt to reinstate the old dynamic through the particular tools that worked on you historically. Do not take this personally. Do not interpret it as malice. Understand it as the predictable response of a system that has been changed unilaterally. The other person did not consent to a revision of the relationship. You revised it anyway, because you had the right to revise your own standard at any point. Their resistance is not evidence that the revision was wrong. It is evidence that it was real enough to be felt. The truth is, the most important relationships in your life are the ones most worth recalibrating, and the ones where recalibration will take the longest. Both things are true simultaneously. Here is what sustains the process when the timeline extends beyond expectations. The understanding that you are not doing this for the other person's response. The response is a byproduct. The actual work is the daily maintenance of a standard you have set for yourself, independent of whether it is being recognized, rewarded, or even noticed by the people around you. The standard exists because you have decided it should exist. Not because external validation has confirmed it. Not because the relationships have already caught up to it. Because you decided. This is the deepest form of the discipline this book has been building toward. The discipline of holding a standard in the absence of confirmation. Maintaining the new behavior when the old response is still arriving. Of continuing to show up at the level you have decided is yours, in rooms that still treat you as though you are operating at the old one. Water and stone. Not the dramatic crash. The daily, patient, unremarkable contact of a new standard applied consistently until the shape of the relationship is no longer what it was. The recalibration comes. It always comes. Not on your timeline. Not with fanfare. One day, you simply notice that the room is treating you differently. The test did not arrive this time. The old pattern was not attempted. Not because you demanded the change. Because you made it unavailable. You have now reclaimed the rooms that had the oldest models of you. The final chapter is not about any specific technique. It is about what all of these techniques are pointing toward. The kind of person who no longer needs techniques because they have become the thing the techniques were designed to build. Chapter 10. The person the room feels before you speak. There is a version of everything in this book that is entirely performative. A person who has memorized the posture adjustments and the vocal techniques and the boundary language and the gap practice, and deploys all of it consciously, deliberately, as a managed presentation. This person will produce results. The signals will be different, and the rooms will respond differently to them for a while. But there is a ceiling to what performance can sustain. The ceiling is the moment of genuine pressure. The moment when the performance is too costly to maintain and the unresolved interior breaks through. And everyone in the room who was receiving the performance feels the break. And everything that was built by the performance is undermined in a single moment of authenticity in the wrong direction. This final chapter is about removing that ceiling. Everything taught in this book was scaffolding. Necessary scaffolding. The kind that allows a structure to be built while the foundation cures. But scaffolding is not the structure. The structure is what remains when the scaffolding is removed. And the structure this entire book has been pointing toward is not a person who has learned to manage their signals. It is a person who no longer needs to manage them because the signals are now accurate. Because what the outside broadcasts and what the inside holds are the same thing. The truth is, sustained authority is not built from technique. It is built from congruence. The alignment of what you believe about your own worth, how you hold your own standard, the decisions you make when no one is watching, and the signals your body, voice, and language produce when someone is. Most people live with a gap between their internal self-assessment and their external presentation. The internal assessment says, I am capable of more than this room is giving me credit for. The external presentation says, but I am not certain enough of that to act on it without the room's confirmation first. This gap is the source of every pattern this book has addressed. The fidget, the upward inflection, the vocabulary of diminishment, the reactive composure, the absent limit. All of it comes from that single gap. And technique can bridge the gap temporarily. Only a genuine revision of the internal standard can close it permanently. So how does that revision happen? Not through a single decision, though the decision is necessary. Not through a single conversation or a single chapter or a single realization, though each of these contributes. Through the accumulation of consistent behavior over time. Specifically, through the accumulation of moments in which you held the standard you had decided was yours, under conditions that tested it, without retreating and without needing the room to confirm that the standard was appropriate. Every time you held the gap and chose your response instead of reacting, you built something. Every time you entered a room with a decision already made rather than waiting for the room to make it for you, you built something. Every time you spoke without the vocabulary of diminishment, held a limit without anger, stayed settled under pressure, you built something. Not a performance. A record. A record that your own nervous system keeps with absolute accuracy. This is where most people stop. They treat the behavioral changes as means to an end. As tools for producing a different response from the rooms around them. And they are that. But they are also something else simultaneously. They are the raw material of a revised self-concept. Every piece of behavior that contradicts the old model accumulates as evidence against it. And after enough evidence has accumulated, the old model becomes untenable. Not because you argued against it. Because you lived against it consistently enough that it could not survive the data. Most people react to the slow pace of internal change by looking for faster external confirmation. You choose to build the interior and let the exterior follow. Now consider what the room actually feels when it encounters a person who has completed this process. Not a person in the middle of building, though that person already produces a different response than they did before. A person who has been building long enough that the building is no longer visible because it has become structure. The room feels something it cannot fully articulate. It is not charisma, though it may be mistaken for it. It is not dominance, though it is sometimes confused with it. It is not confidence, though confidence is one of its symptoms. What the room feels is the particular gravity of a person who is completely congruent, whose interior and exterior are running the same program, who is not managing their image because they are not afraid of what their image reveals, who is not performing authority because they are not distinguishing between who they are and who they are showing up as. They have become the same person in public and in private, in high-stakes rooms and in ordinary ones, under pressure and in ease. This congruence is extraordinarily rare, and it is felt before a word is spoken, because it broadcasts at a frequency that the human nervous system detects automatically. The same ancient subcortical machinery that reads threat and safety, dominance and submission, is also reading congruence. And it responds to congruence the way all living systems respond to structural integrity, with a particular trust that is reserved for things that will not collapse under weight. The truth is, the room is not giving authority to the most impressive person in it. It is giving authority to the most solid one. And solidity is not built in a day, but it is built by days, one after another, each one a choice. Most people react to the length of the process by abandoning it for something faster. You choose to understand that there is nothing faster. There is only the work, and then the result, and then the maintenance of the result, for as long as you intend to occupy rooms. Here is what this looks like in practice at the end of the building process. The person who has completed this work does not think about their posture in a room. The posture is simply what it is, because the body has stopped receiving the internal signals that contracted it. They do not monitor their vocal tone for upward inflection. The inflection is settled, because the question of whether what they are saying deserves to be heard has been answered so many times, consistently, that it is no longer a question. They do not rehearse their limits before a conversation where they might need to state one. The limit is simply known, because the standard that generates it is stable. They do not walk into rooms and wonder whether they belong there. Not because they never feel uncertainty. Uncertainty is part of being in contact with a genuinely complex world, and anyone who claims to have eliminated it is either lying or no longer growing. But the uncertainty is no longer about the fundamental question. The fundamental question, the one that drove every self-reducing pattern, the question of whether their presence requires apology or justification, has been settled. And from that settled place, uncertainty about specific situations or outcomes is navigable. It is information rather than indictment. This is the person the room feels before they speak. Not a performance. Not a presentation. A person. Fully occupying their own space, fully present in their own standard, fully congruent between the interior that decided and the exterior that broadcasts the decision. And the room responds. Not with applause. Not with deference. With something quieter and more durable than either. The particular adjustment that happens when a room recognizes it is in the presence of something solid. The conversations offered at a different level. The challenges that arrive less frequently and with less force. The opportunities that appear because the people who carry them have revised their assessment of what you are worth and what you are capable of handling. None of this is guaranteed. Nothing in the real world is. There will be rooms that resist the new signal. People who have too much invested in the old model to revise it regardless of the evidence. Situations where the structural forces are too large for any individual's presence to fully navigate. These are real, and they are not your failure. But they are the exception now, not the rule. The rule has changed. Because you changed it. Not by asking for different treatment. By building the interior that makes different treatment the accurate response. The truth is, you were never invisible. You were just broadcasting a signal that told the room you were. That signal has been replaced. The invisible tax is no longer being charged because the account it drew from has been closed. Closed not dramatically, not with a single moment of declaration, but quietly, deliberately, in 10,000 ordinary moments of choosing the standard over the comfortable retreat from it. This is where the book ends. Not because the work is finished. The work is never finished. But because you now have everything you need to continue it without instruction. The room is waiting. Walk in. You came into this book carrying something. The specific weight of being overlooked when you deserved to be seen. The particular quiet of being in a room that did not register your presence. That weight was real. It was earned through years of accumulated patterns that no one ever named clearly enough for you to correct them. Now they have been named. Presence is a decision. Composure is a discipline. Limits are a language. The voice, the body, the first 5 seconds, the words you choose, and the words you refuse, all of it points to a single truth. Respect is not given. It is not charmed out of people. It is not stumbled into. It is built deliberately from the inside out, through standards applied consistently, whether no one is watching or someone is. You do not need to announce this. You do not need to explain it. You do not need anyone's permission to hold yourself to a higher standard than the one the world assigned you. What you need is to begin. Not tomorrow. Not after one more chapter, one more reflection, one more comfortable delay. Now. Walk into the next room as though you have already earned your place in it. Because you have. You simply stopped acting like it for a while. That stops today. The question is not whether you can command respect. The question is whether you are willing to maintain the standard required to keep it.